I am Elena, and what I am about to expose was hidden in darkness for years. Like this video now, comment under it, and share it. This is not optional. This is a warning. You must watch this until the very end, because leaving early can leave you unprotected. Do you know there are moments when your prayers become targets instead of weapons? Witches wait for these times, study these times, and attack in these times. An awakening is beginning now, and what you are about to hear was never meant for you to know. The first time you should never pray is when you are emotionally wounded but spiritually silent. This is not taught in churches. This is not worn from pulpits. But in the occult world, this moment is studied carefully. When your heart is bleeding and your spirit is not guarded, your prayers change frequency. You are still speaking words, but your authority is leaking. Witches recognize this instantly. You pray after betrayal. You pray after rejection. You pray after sudden loss. You pray when tears are fresh and confusion is loud, and you think you are being strong. But from the other side, this is called an open emotional gate. In the coven, we were trained to listen for prayers soaked in pain, but empty of spiritual positioning. Not every prayer shakes heaven. Some prayers expose the soul. When you pray wounded without spiritual alignment, your words reveal your fears. Your tone reveals your doubt. Your language reveals where faith cracked. And witches don't attack strength. They exploit exposure. This is why some people pray harder after trauma and experience more resistance instead of relief. You wonder why peace doesn't come. You wonder why nightmares increase. You wonder why pressure intensifies. It is not because God is absent. It is because you are praying from pain instead of authority. In occult practice, wounded prayers are considered locator signals. They help identify who is spiritually bleeding, who is tired, who is desperate, who is vulnerable to spiritual interference. You may not believe this, but witches do not need your address. They need your emotional frequency. When you pray from emotional chaos, your spiritual defenses weaken, your discernment dulls, your boundaries collapse, your soul becomes loud in the spirit realm. And this is when manipulation begins. Subtle thoughts enter, heavy thoughts, accusing thoughts, thoughts that feel like your own but aren't. You prayed and nothing changed. God didn't hear you. You must have done something wrong. Maybe you are not chosen. These are not random thoughts. They are planted. Witches wait for emotional collapse because emotions override spiritual discipline. Pain makes you impulsive. Pain makes you impatient. Pain makes you careless with words. And words spoken in pain carry power, but not authority. I remember a woman who prayed every night after her divorce. She fasted. She cried. She begged God for restoration, but her prayers were soaked in abandonment, not alignment. Within weeks, her sleep was disturbed. Her dreams turned dark. Her anxiety escalated. Her faith felt heavy. She thought she was being attacked because she prayed. The truth is, she prayed without first sealing herself. In spiritual warfare, order matters. Before prayer comes positioning. Before words come covering. Before asking comes standing. When you pray wounded without grounding yourself in spiritual authority, you speak from the soul instead of the spirit, and witches can hear soul noise clearly. They cannot hear faith anchored in authority. They cannot touch prayers rooted in identity. But they can interfere with prayers driven by pain. This is why silence with alignment is sometimes safer than loud prayer without it. You were never meant to pray emotionally exposed. You were meant to pray emotionally submitted. There is a difference. Submitted emotions are surrendered. Exposed emotions are leaking. When emotions lead prayer, fear sneaks in. When spirit leads prayer, fear is silenced. This is why witches wait for moments of heartbreak, grief, humiliation, and shock. They wait because they know you are more likely to pray incorrectly. And praying incorrectly does not mean wrong words. It means wrong position. You are not powerless, but you can be out of order. And spiritual order determines spiritual outcome. Before you pray in pain, you must stabilize your authority. You must slow down. You must ground yourself in truth. You must remind yourself who you are before speaking. Otherwise, you are not warring. You are broadcasting. This is the first dangerous moment. Praying while emotionally wounded but spiritually unguarded. And if you don't understand this, the next moments will shock you even more. The second time you should never pray is when you are angry, reactive, and seeking revenge, even if you call it justice. This is one of the most exploited moments in spiritual warfare, and almost no one warns you about it. Anger feels powerful. It feels righteous. It feels justified. But in the spirit realm, uncontrolled anger is not strength. It is volatility. Witches wait for this state. In the occult world, anger-driven prayer is classified as weaponized emotion without authority. It sounds forceful. It feels bold. But it is spiritually unstable. When you pray while angry, your words accelerate faster than your discernment. Your mouth outruns your spirit. You speak things you haven't measured. You declare things you were never authorized to release. And witches listen carefully to angry prayers. Because anger reveals where bitterness is hiding. Anger exposes unforgiveness. Anger creates legal ground. You say you're praying against injustice, but your heart is demanding punishment. You say you want God's will. But your spirit is craving retaliation. In the coven, we were trained to wait for believers to pray like this. Why? Because anger-based prayers fracture spiritual alignment. The moment you pray from rage, you step out of spiritual authority and into emotional force. And emotional force is predictable, manipulatable, controllable. Witches cannot override authority, but they can amplify emotion. That is the trap. When you pray angry, spiritual interference does always stop the prayer. It distorts it. You start seeing signs everywhere. You misinterpret scriptures. You feel justified in harsh decisions. You confuse confirmation with coincidence. This is how deception creeps in. I watched believers pray angry prayers after betrayal, and within days their lives became chaotic. Relationships collapsed. Decisions backfired. Peace vanished. They thought warfare intensified because they were dangerous. The truth is they were exposed. Anger removes spiritual filters. It strips patience. It bypasses wisdom. And witches know this. That is why they provoke you. They stir conflict. They trigger old wounds. They push buttons through people close to you, not to stop your prayer, but to contaminate it. A contaminated prayer is more useful to the enemy than silence. When anger fuels prayer, you unknowingly speak curses instead of commands. You curse situations. You curse timelines. Sometimes you even curse yourself. I am tired of this life. I am done with people. I don't care what happens anymore. These statements are not harmless. They are doors. And witches are trained to capitalize on doors, not walls. You must understand this clearly. God listens to angry cries, but witches listen for angry declarations. God weighs the heart. Witches track the words. This is why Scripture warns about being slow to speak. Not because words are weak, but because words are powerful when misused. An angry prayer feels intense, but intensity without alignment produces backlash. You feel drained after praying. You feel restless. You feel more agitated. That is a sign your spirit was not leading. Spiritual authority is calm, not chaotic, focused, not frantic, grounded, not reactive. When Jesus confronted darkness, he never shouted emotionally. He spoke decisively, which is fear calm authority. They are not intimidated by rage. Rage is noisy. Authority is quiet and lethal. If you pray while angry, pause. Not because prayer is wrong, but because timing is everything. Anger clouds spiritual vision. And praying without vision invites confusion. This is one of the biggest mistakes believers make. They think passion equals power. It does not. Alignment equals power. Before you pray, you must ask yourself, am I responding or am I reacting? Am I led by the Spirit or driven by emotion? Because witches wait for reactions. They cannot predict Spirit-led obedience, but they can predict emotional patterns. This is the second dangerous moment, praying from anger instead of authority. And the next moment is even more strategic and far more dangerous. The third time you should never pray is when you are spiritually exhausted but still forcing words. This is one of the most misunderstood traps in spiritual warfare. Spiritual exhaustion is not weakness, but ignoring it is dangerous. Witches wait for this moment because fatigue makes you careless with spiritual discipline. You are still praying, but your spirit is not fully present. In the occult, this state is called forced engagement. It is when a believer continues spiritual activity without renewal. When you are spiritually drained, your prayers lose sharpness. Your focus scatters. Your authority thins. You speak truth, but without fire. You declare scripture, but without weight. And witches can tell the difference. They are trained to recognize spiritual burnout. They listen for repetition without revelation, routine without presence, words without breath. This is when interference becomes easy. You pray because you feel obligated, because you are afraid not to, because you think stopping means losing ground. But in reality, forced prayer can create vulnerability. There is a difference between persistence and pressure. Persistence is spirit-led. Pressure is fear-driven. Witches cannot penetrate prayer that flows from rest, but they can exploit prayer that flows from exhaustion. When you are tired, discernment dulls. You stop listening and start talking. You stop waiting and start filling silence. And silence is not the enemy. In warfare training, we were taught that unrested opponents make mistakes. They rush. They repeat. They miss signals. Spiritual exhaustion makes you predictable. You pray the same way, at the same time, with the same words. Predictability invites monitoring. This is why Jesus often withdrew. Instead of praying publicly when tired, he understood timing. He understood renewal. But many believers don't. They push through fatigue, thinking it proves devotion. But devotion without wisdom leads to depletion. I remember a man who prayed aggressively every night for months, fasting, declaring, binding, rebuking, but he never rested. Eventually, his prayers felt empty His dreams became strange. His joy disappeared. He thought the enemy was intensifying attacks. The truth was simpler. His spirit was exhausted. Witches wait for this moment because tired prayers lack resistance. They slide past instead of standing firm. This is when distractions increase. This is when intrusive thoughts appear during prayer. This is when confusion enters. You start questioning everything. Your calling, your faith, your identity. Not because prayer failed, but because rest was ignored. Rest is not passive. It is strategic. In spiritual warfare, rest recalibrates authority. It sharpens hearing. It restores boundaries. When you pray exhausted, your spirit opens gaps trying to compensate, and gaps invite interference. This is why some prayers leave you feeling heavier instead of lighter, because you were pouring from an empty vessel. Witches do not fear loud prayer. They fear rested prayer. A rested believer is dangerous. A fatigued believer is exposed. You must know when to be silent, when to worship instead of warfare, when to sit instead of speak. Forcing prayer does not impress heaven, but it signals vulnerability in the spirit realm. God does not require performance. He requires presence. If your spirit is drained, stop speaking and start renewing. Stillness can be a shield. This is the third dangerous moment, praying while spiritually exhausted instead of spiritually aligned. And the final moment is the most strategic one of all. The fourth time you should never pray is when you are praying publicly but living privately compromised. This is the most dangerous moment of all, and it is the most exploited. Witches wait for this state more than any other. In the occult, this is called exposed authority. It is when a believer speaks boldly in public, but ignores alignment in private. Public prayer creates visibility. Private compromise creates access. When those two collide, spiritual backlash follows. You pray loudly in front of others. You post scriptures. You declare victory. You rebuke darkness openly, but behind closed doors, discipline is loose. Boundaries are blurred. Convictions are negotiated. Witches do not measure your volume. They measure your consistency. Authority does not come from how strong you sound. It comes from how aligned you live. This is why public prayer without private obedience becomes dangerous. Not because prayer is wrong, but because exposure without covering invites retaliation. In occult training, we were taught to monitor believers who prayed publicly while living casually. Why? Because their words traveled farther than their foundations. When prayer exceeds obedience, imbalance is created, and imbalance creates spiritual friction. You begin to experience sudden resistance, unexplainable delays, unusual opposition. You think it because you are effective. But often it is because you are uncovered. Private compromise weakens spiritual armor, not instantly, but gradually. You lose sensitivity, you justify behaviors, you silence conviction, and then you pray publicly with confidence. That combination is dangerous. Witches wait for believers to expose themselves spiritually by declaring authority they are not maintaining privately. This is not about perfection. It is about alignment. Every unaddressed compromise becomes a crack. Every ignored conviction becomes a door. And doors don't need force. They need permission. Public prayer amplifies your spiritual signal. Private compromise distorts it. That distortion is detectable. I watched believers pray publicly and then experience sudden spiritual heaviness. Their peace vanished, their clarity blurred, their confidence shook. They thought the enemy was stronger. The truth was simpler. Their covering was thinner. When your private life contradicts your public declaration, spiritual authority weakens. Not because God abandons you, but because alignment sustains power. Witches are not afraid of believers who pray loudly. They are afraid of believers who live cleanly. Clean living creates silence in the spirit realm. No hooks, no leverage, no access. But compromise creates noise. It announces instability. This is why Scripture emphasizes integrity, not for morality alone, but for warfare. Integrity seals authority. When you pray publicly, you must ensure your private life is guarded. Your thoughts, your habits, your choices. Otherwise, your prayer becomes exposure instead of protection. This is the final dangerous moment, praying publicly while living privately misaligned. And now you understand the pattern. Witches do not attack prayer. They wait for timing, position, and exposure. You have just been armed with knowledge that breaks traps and restores authority. This is not fear, this is awareness. You are not powerless, and you are not vulnerable when you stand aligned. If this opened your eyes, comment now and declare that you are choosing wisdom. Share this video, because someone near you is praying at the wrong time, and does he know it? Remember, watching until the very end was not optional, it was protection. Stand firm, stay aligned, and walk forward in authority and victory.